Hello, Cardinals, and welcome to our next installment of Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake. 6. Oryx. Snowman wakes up suddenly. Has someone touched him? But there's nobody there. Nothing. It's totally dark. No stars. Clouds must have come in. He turns over and pulls his sheet around him. He's shivering. It's the night breeze. Most likely he's still drunk. Sometimes it's hard to tell. He stares up into the darkness, wondering how soon it'll be morning, hoping he'll be able to go back to sleep. There's an owl hooting somewhere. That fierce vibration up close and far away at once, like the lowest note on a Peruvian flute. Maybe it's hunting. Hunting what? Now he can feel Oryx floating towards him through the air, as if on soft feathery wings. She's landing now, settling. She's very close to him, stretched out on her side, just a skin's distance away. Miraculously, she can fit onto the platform beside him, although it isn't a large platform. If he had a candle or a flashlight, he'd be able to see her, the slender outline of her, a pale glow against the darkness. If he put out his hand, he could touch her, but that would make her vanish. It wasn't the sex, he says to her. She doesn't answer, but he can feel her disbelief. He's making her sad because he's taking away some of her knowledge, her power. It wasn't just the sex. A dark smile from her. That's better. You know I love you. You're the only one. She isn't the first woman he's ever said that to. He shouldn't have used it up so much earlier in his life. He shouldn't have treated it like a tool, a wedge, a key to open women. By the time he got around to meaning it, the words had sounded fraudulent to him, and he'd been ashamed to pronounce them. No, really, he says to Oryx. No answer, no response. She was never very forthcoming at the best of times. Tell me just one thing, he'd say, back when he was still Jimmy. Ask me a question, she'd reply. So he would ask, and then she might say, I don't know, I've forgotten, or I don't know, I don't want to tell you that, or Jimmy, you're so bad, it's not your business. Once she'd said, you have a lot of pictures in your head, Jimmy. Where did you get them? Why do you think that they are pictures of me? He thought he understood her vagueness, her evasiveness. It's all right, he told her, stroking her hair. None of it was your fault. None of what, Jimmy? How long had it taken him to piece her together from the slivers of her he'd gathered and hoarded so carefully? There was Crake's story about her and Jimmy's story about her as well, a more romantic version. And then there was her own story about herself, which was different from both and not very romantic at all. Snowman rifles through these 3 stories in his head. There must have been other versions of her mother's story, the story of the man who'd bought her, the story of the man who'd bought her after that, and the third man's story, the worst man of them all, the one in San Francisco. A pious bullshit artist, but Jimmy had never heard those. Oryx was so delicate. Filigree would think, picturing her bones inside her small body. She had a triangular face, big eyes, a small jaw, a hymenoptera face, a mantid face, the face of a Siamese cat. Skin of the palest yellow, smooth and translucent, like old expensive porcelain. Looking at her, you knew that a woman of such beauty, slightness, and one-time poverty must have led a difficult life, but that this life would not have consisted in scrubbing floors. Did you ever scrub floors? Jimmy asked her once. Floors? She thought a minute. We didn't have floors. When I got as far as the floors, it wasn't me scrubbing them. One thing about that early time, she said, the time without floors, the pounded earth surfaces were swept clean every day. They were used for sitting on while eating and for sleeping on, so that was important. Nobody wanted to get old food on themselves. Nobody wanted fleas. When Jimmy was 7 or 8 or 9, Oryx was born. Where exactly? Hard to tell. Some distant foreign place. It was a village, though, said Oryx. A village with trees all around and fields nearby, or possibly rice paddies. The huts had thatch of some kind on the roofs. Palm fronds? Although the best huts had roofs of tin. A village in Indonesia, or else Myanmar. Not those, said Oryx, though she couldn't be sure. It wasn't India, though. Vietnam, Jimmy guessed. Cambodia? Oryx looked down at her hands, examining her nails. It didn't matter. She couldn't remember the language she'd spoken as a child. She'd been too young to retain it, that earliest language. The words had all been scoured out of her head. But it wasn't the same as the language of the city to which she'd been first taken, or not the same dialect, because she'd had to learn a different way of speaking. She did remember that, the clumsiness of the words in her mouth, the feeling of being struck dumb. This village was a place where everyone was poor and there were many children, said Oryx. She herself was quite little when she was sold. Her mother had a number of children, among them 2 older sons who would soon be able to work in the fields, which was a good thing because the father was sick. He coughed and coughed. This coughing punctuated her earliest memories. Something wrong with the lungs, Jimmy had guessed. Of course, they all probably smoked like maniacs when they could get the cigarettes. Smoking dulled the edge. He'd congratulated himself on this insight. The villagers set the father's illness down to bad weather, bad fate, bad spirits. Illness had an element of shame to it. No one wanted to be contaminated by the illness of another, so the father of Oryx was pitied, but also blamed and shunned. His wife tended him with silent resentment. Bells were rung, however. Prayers were said. Small images were burned in the fire, but all of this was useless because the father died. Everyone in the village knew what would happen next because if there was no man to work in the fields or in the rice paddies, then the raw materials of life had to come from somewhere else. Oryx had been a younger child, often pushed to the side, but suddenly she was made much of and given better food than usual and a special blue jacket because the other village women were helping out and they wanted her to look pretty and healthy. Children who were ugly or deformed or who were not bright or couldn't talk very well, such children went for less or might not be sold at all. The village women might need to sell their own children one day, and if they helped out, they'd be able to count on such help in return. In the village, it was not called selling, this transaction. The talk about it implied apprenticeship. The children were being trained to earn their living in the wide world, and this was the gloss put on it. Besides, if they stayed where they were, what was there for them to do? Especially the girls, said Oryx. They would only get married and make more children who would then have to be sold in their turn. Sold or thrown into the river, to float away to the sea, because there was only so much food to go around. One day, a man came to the village. It was the same man who always came. Usually he arrived in a car, bumping over the dirt track, but this time there had been a lot of rain and the road was too muddy. Each village had its own such man who would make the dangerous journey from the city at irregular intervals, although it was always known ahead of time that he was on his way. "What city?" asked Jimmy. But Oryx only smiled. Talking about this made her hungry, she said. Why didn't Jimmy phone out for some pizza? Mushrooms, artichoke hearts, anchovies, no pepperoni. "You want some too?" she said. "No," said Jimmy. "Why won't you tell me?" "Why do you care?" said Oryx. "I don't care. I never think about it. It's long ago now." "This man," said Oryx, contemplating the pizza as if it were a jigsaw puzzle, and then picking off the mushrooms, which she liked to eat first, would have 2 other men with him, who were his servants and who carried rifles to fend off the bandits. He wore expensive clothes, and except for the mud and dust, everyone got muddy and dusty on the way to the village, he was clean and well-kempt. He had a watch, a shiny gold-colored watch he consulted often, pulling up his sleeve to display it. This watch was reassuring, a badge of quality. Maybe the watch was real gold. There was some who said it was. This man wasn't regarded as a criminal of any sort, but as an honorable businessman who didn't cheat, or not much, and who paid in cash. Therefore, he was treated with respect and shown hospitality because no one in the village wanted to get on his bad side. What if he ceased to visit? What if a family needed to sell a child and he would not buy it because he'd been offended on a previous visit? He was the villagers' bank, their insurance policy, their kind, rich uncle, their only charm against bad luck, and he had been needed more and more often because the weather had become so strange and could no longer be predicted. Too much rain or not enough, too much wind, too much heat, and the crops were suffering. The man smiled a lot, greeted many of the village men by name. He always gave a little speech, the same one each time. He wanted everybody to be happy, he would say. He wanted satisfaction on both sides. He didn't want any hard feelings. Hadn't he bent over backwards for them, taking children that were plain and stupid and a burden on his hands, just to oblige them? If they had any criticism of the way he conducted affairs, they should tell him. But there was never any criticism, though there was grumbling behind his back. He never paid any more than he had to, it was said. He was admired for this, however. It showed that he was good at his trade, and the children would be in competent hands. Each time the gold wristwatch man came to the village, he would take several children away with him to sell flowers to tourists on the city streets. The work was easy, and the children would be well treated. He assured the mothers he wasn't a low-down thug or a liar. He wasn't a pimp. They would be well fed and given a safe place to sleep. They would be carefully guarded, and they would be paid a sum of money which they could send home to their families or not, whatever they chose. This sum would be a percentage of their earnings, minus the expense of their room and board. No money was ever sent to the village. Everyone knew it would not be. In exchange for the child apprentice, he would give the fathers, or else the widowed mothers, a good price, or what he said was a good price, and it was a decent enough price, considering what people were used to. With this money, the mothers who sold their children would be able to give the remaining children a better chance at life. So they told one another. Jimmy was outraged by this the first time he heard about it. That was in the day of his outrage, also in the days of his making a fool of himself over anything concerning Oryx. You don't understand, said Oryx. She was still eating the pizza in bed, and with that she was having a Coke and a side of fries. She'd finished with the mushrooms, and now she was eating the artichoke hearts. She never ate the crust. She said it made her feel very rich to throw away food. Many people did it. It was the custom. An asshole custom, said Jimmy. He was sitting on a chair beside the bed, watching her pink cat's tongue as she licked her fingers. Jimmy, you are bad. Don't swear. You want a pepperoni. You didn't order them, but they put them on anyway. I guess they heard you wrong. Asshole isn't swearing. It's only graphic description. Well, I don't think you should say it. She was eating the anchovies now. She always saved them till last. I'd like to kill this guy. What guy? You want this Coke? I can't finish it. The guy you just told me about. Oh, Jimmy, you would like it better maybe if we all starved to death, said Oryx, with her small rippling laugh. This was the laugh he feared the most from her, because it disguised amused contempt. It chilled him, a cold breeze on a moonlit lake. Of course, he'd marched his outrage off to Crake. He'd whammed the furniture. Those were his furniture whamming days. What Crake had said was this: Jimmy, look at it realistically. You can't couple a minimum access to food with an expanding population indefinitely. Homo sapiens doesn't seem to be able to cut himself off at the supply end. He's one of the few species that don't limit reproduction in the face of dwindling resources. In other words, and up to a point, of course, the less we eat, the more we fuck. How do you account for that? Said Jimmy. Imagination, said Crake. Men can imagine their own deaths. They can see them coming, and the mere thought of impending death acts like an aphrodisiac. A dog or a rabbit doesn't behave like that. Take birds. In a lean season, they cut down on the eggs, or they won't mate at all. They put their energy into staying alive themselves until times get better. But human beings hope they can stick their souls into someone else, some new version of themselves, and live on forever. As a species, we're doomed by hope, then. You could call it hope, that or desperation. But we're doomed without hope as well, said Jimmy. Only as individuals, said Crake cheerfully. Well, it sucks. Jimmy, grow up. Crake wasn't the first person who had ever said that to Jimmy. The wristwatch man would stay overnight in the village with his 2 servants and their guns, and would eat and then drink with the men. He would hand out cigarettes, entire packs of them, in gold and silver paper boxes, with the cellophane still on. In the morning, he would look over the children on offer and ask some questions about them. Had they been sick? Were they obedient? And he'd check their teeth. They had to have good teeth, he said, because they would need to smile a lot. And then he would make his selections, and the money would change hands, and he'd say his farewells, and there would be polite nods and bows all around. He would take 3 or 4 children with him, never more. That was the number he could manage. This meant he could pick the best of the crop. He did the same in the other villages in his territory. He was known for his taste and judgment. Oryx said it must have been too bad for a child not to be chosen. Things would be worse for it in the village then. It would lose value. It would be given less to eat. She herself had been chosen first of all. Sometimes the mothers would cry, and also the children, but the mothers would tell the children that what they were doing was good. They were helping their families, and they should go with the man and do everything he told them. The mothers said that after the children had worked in the city for a while and things were better, they could come back to the village. No children ever came back. All of this was understood, and if not condoned, at least pardoned. Still, after the man had left, the mothers who had sold their children felt empty and sad. They felt as if this act, done freely by themselves, no one had forced them, no one had threatened them, had not been performed willingly. They felt cheated as well, as if the price had been too low. Why hadn't they demanded more? And yet, the mothers told themselves, they'd had no choice. The mother of Oryx sold 2 of her children at the same time, not only because she was hard up. She thought the 2 might keep each other company, look out for each other. The other child was a boy, a year older than Oryx. Fewer boys were sold than girls, but they were not therefore more valued. Oryx took this double sale as evidence that her mother had loved her. She had no images of this love. She could offer no anecdotes. It was a belief rather than a memory. The man said he was doing Oryx's mother a special favor, as boys were more trouble and did not obey, and ran away more often. And who would pay him for his trouble then? Also, this boy did not have the right attitude. That much was clear at a glance, and he had a blackened front tooth that gave him a criminal expression. But as he knew she needed the money, he would be generous and would take the boy off her hands. Birdcall. Oryx said she couldn't remember the trip from the village to the city, but she could remember some of the things that had happened. It was like pictures hanging on a wall with around them the blank plaster. It was like looking through other people's windows. It was like dreams. The man with the watch said his name was Uncle N, and that they must call him that or there would be very big trouble. Was that N as in the name or N as in an initial? Jimmy asked. I don't know, Oryx said. Did you ever see it written? Nobody in our village could read, said Oryx. Here, Jimmy, open your mouth. I'll give you the last piece. Remembering this, Snowman can almost taste it. The pizza, and then Oryx's fingers in his mouth, and then the Coke can rolling onto the floor, and then joy, crushing his whole body in its boa constrictor grip. Oh, stolen secret picnics, oh sweet delight, oh clear memory, oh pure pain, oh endless night. This man, Oryx continued, later that night or on some other night, this man said he was their uncle from now on. Now that they were out of sight of the village, he wasn't smiling so much. They must walk very quickly, he said, because the forest around them was full of wild animals with red eyes and long, sharp teeth, and if they ran in among the trees or walked too slowly, these animals would come and tear them to pieces. Oryx was frightened and wanted to hold hands with her brother, but that wasn't possible. Were there tigers? Jimmy asked. Oryx shook her head for no. No tigers. What were these animals then? Jimmy wanted to know. He thought he might get some clues that way as to the location. He could look at the list of habitats that might help. They didn't have names, said Oryx, but I knew what they were. At first, they went single file along the muddy road, walking on the side where it was higher, watching out for snakes. A gun-carrying man was at the front, and then Uncle N, and then the brother, and then the 2 other children who had both been sold, both girls, both older, and then Oryx. At the end came the other gunman. They stopped for a noon meal, cold rice, it was, packed for them by the villagers, and then they walked some more. When they came to a river, one of the men with guns carried Oryx across. He said she was so heavy he would have to drop her into the water, and then the fish would eat her, but that was a joke. He smelled of sweaty cloth and smoke and some sort of perfume or grease that was in his hair. The water came up to his knees. After that, the sun was on a slant and got into her eyes. They must have been going west then, thought Jimmy, and she was very tired. As the sun got lower and lower, the birds began singing and calling, unseen, hidden in the branches and vines of the forest. Raucous croaks and whistles and 4 clear sounds in a row, like a bell. These were the same birds that always called like this as dusk approached, and at dawn, just before the sun came up, and Oryx was consoled by their sounds. The bird calls were familiar. They were part of what she knew. She imagined that one of them, the one like a bell, was her mother's spirit, sent out in the shape of a bird to keep watch over her, and that it was saying, "You will come back." In that village, she told him, some of the people could send their spirits out like that even before they were dead. It was well known. You could learn how to do it. The old women could teach you, and that way you could fly everywhere. You could see what was coming in the future and send messages and appear in other people's dreams. The bird called and then fell silent. And then the sun went down abruptly and it was dark. That night they slept in a shed. Possibly it was a shed for livestock. It had that smell. They had to pee in the bushes all together in a row with one of the gunmen standing guard. The men made a fire outside and laughed and talked, and smoke came in, but Oryx didn't care because she went to sleep. Did they sleep on the ground or in hammocks or on cots? Asked Jimmy, but she said it wasn't important. Her brother was there beside her. He never paid very much attention to her before, but now he wanted to be close to her. The next morning, they walked some more and came to the place where Uncle N's car had been left, under the protection of several men in a small village, smaller than their own village and dirtier. Women and children peered at them from doorways but did not smile. One woman made a sign against evil. Uncle N checked to make sure nothing was missing from the car, and then he paid the men, and the children were told to get in. Oryx had never been inside a car before, and she didn't like the smell. It wasn't a solar car, it was the gasoline kind, and not new. One of the men drove, Uncle N beside him, and the other man sat in the back with all 4 children jammed in beside him. Uncle N was in a bad temper and told the children not to ask any questions. The road was bumpy and it was hot inside the car. Oryx felt sick and thought she would vomit, but then she dozed off. They must have driven for a long time. They stopped when it was night again. Uncle N and the man in front went into a low building, some sort of inn perhaps. The other man stretched out on the front seat and soon began to snore. The children slept in the back of the car as best they could. The back doors were locked. They couldn't get out of the car without climbing over the man, and they were afraid to do that because he would think that they were trying to run away. Somebody wet their pants during the night. Oryx could smell it, but it wasn't her. In the morning, they were all herded around to the back of the building where there was an open latrine. A pig on the other side of it watched them while they squatted. After more hours of bumpy driving, they stopped where there was a gate across the road with 2 soldiers. Uncle N told the soldiers that the children were his nieces and nephews. Their mother had died, and he was taking them to live in his own house with his own family. He was smiling again. "You have a lot of nieces and nephews," said one of the soldiers, grinning. "That is my misfortune," said Uncle N. "And all their mothers die?" "That is the sad truth." "We aren't sure we should believe you," said the other soldier, also grinning. "Here," said Uncle N. He pulled Oryx out of the car. "What's my name?" he said to her, putting his smiling face down close. "Uncle N," she said. The 2 soldiers laughed, and Uncle N laughed also. He patted Oryx on her shoulder and told her to get back into the car, and then shook hands with the soldiers, putting his hand into his pocket first, and then the soldiers swung the gate open. Once the car was going along the road again, Uncle N gave Oryx a hard candy in the shape of a tiny lemon. She sucked it for a while and then took it out to keep. She had no pocket, so she held it in her sticky fingers. That night she comforted herself by licking her own hand. The children cried at night, not loudly. They cried them to themselves. They were frightened. They didn't know where they were going, and they had been taken away from what they knew. Also, said Oryx, they had no more love, supposing they'd had some in the first place. But they had a money value. They represented a cash profit to others. They must have sensed that they were worth something. Of course, said Oryx, having a money value was no substitute for love. Every child should have love. Every person should have it. She herself would rather have had her mother's love, the love she still continued to believe in, the love that followed her through the jungle in the form of a bird so that she would not be too frightened or lonely. But love was undependable. It came and then it went, so it was good to have a money value, because then, at least, those who wanted to make a profit from you would make sure you were fed enough and not damaged too much. Also, there were many who had neither love nor a money value, and having one of these things was better than having nothing. Roses. The city was a chaos, filled with people and cars and noise and bad smells and a language that was hard to understand. The four new children were shocked by it at first, as if they had been plunged into a cauldron of hot water, as if the city was physically hurtful to them. Uncle N had experience, however. He treated the new children as if they were cats. He gave them time to get used to things. He put them into a small room in a 3-story building on the 3rd floor, with a barred window they could look out but not climb out. And then he led them outside gradually, a short distance at first and an hour at a time. There were already 5 children staying in the room, so it was crowded, but there was enough space for a thin mattress for each child laid down at night so that the entire floor was covered with mattresses and children, and then rolled up during the day. These mattresses were worn and stained and smelled of urine, but rolling them up neatly was the first thing the new children had to learn. From the other, more seasoned children, they learned more things. The first was that Uncle N would always be watching them, even when it appeared that they had been left in the city on their own. He would always know where they were. All he had to do was hold his shiny watch up to his ear and it would tell him, because there was a little voice inside it that knew everything. This was reassuring, as nobody else would be allowed to harm them. On the other hand, Uncle N would see if you didn't work hard enough or tried to run away, or if you kept for yourself any of the money you got from the tourists. And then you would be punished. Uncle N's men would beat you, and then you would have bruises. They might burn you as well. Some of the children claimed to have endured these punishments and were proud of it. They had scars. If you tried these forbidden things often enough, laziness, theft, running away, you'd be sold to someone much worse, it was said, than Uncle N. Or else you'd be killed and tossed on a rubbish heap, and nobody would care because nobody would know who you were. Oryx said that Uncle N really knew his business because children would believe other children about punishments more readily than they would believe adults. Adults threatened to do things they never did, but children told you what would happen, or what they were afraid would happen, or what had happened already to them or to other children that they'd known. The week after Oryx and her brother arrived in the mattress room, 3 of the older children were taken away. They were going to another country, said Uncle N. This country was called San Francisco. Was it because they'd been bad? No, said Uncle N. It was a reward for being good. All who were obedient and diligent might go there someday. There was nowhere Oryx wanted to go except home, but home was becoming hazy in her mind. She could still hear her mother's spirit calling, "You will come back," but that voice was becoming fainter and more indistinct. It was no longer like a bell, it was like a whisper. It was a question now rather than a statement, a question with no answer. Oryx and her brother and the other 2 newcomers were taken to watch the more experienced children selling flowers. The flowers were roses, red and white and pink. They were collected at the flower market early in the morning. The thorns had been removed from the stems so the roses could be passed from hand to hand without pricking anyone. You had to loiter around the entranceways to the best hotels, the banks where foreign money could be changed, and the expensive shops were good locations too. And you had to keep your eye out for the policemen. If a policeman came near or stared hard at you, you should walk the other way quickly. Selling flowers to the tourists was not allowed unless you had an official permit, and such permits were too expensive, but there was nothing to worry about, said Uncle N. The police knew all about it, only they had to appear as if they didn't know. When you saw a foreigner, especially one with a foreign woman beside him, you should approach and hold up the roses, and you should smile. You should not stare or laugh at their strange foreign hair and watercolored eyes. If they took a flower and asked how much, you should smile even more and hold out your hand. If they spoke to you, asking questions, you should look as if you didn't understand. That part was easy enough. They would always give you more, sometimes much more, than the flower was worth. The money had to be put into a little bag hanging inside your clothes. That was to protect against pickpockets and random snatching from street urchins, those unlucky ones without an Uncle N to look after them. If anyone, especially any man, tried to take you by the hand and lead you off somewhere, you should pull your hand away. If they held on too tight, you should sit down. That would be a signal, and one of Uncle N's men would come, or Uncle N himself. You should never get into a car or go into a hotel. If a man asked you to do that, you should tell Uncle N as soon as possible. Oryx had been given a new name by Uncle N. All the children got new names from him. They were told to forget their old names, and soon they did. Oryx was now Susu. She was good at selling roses. She was so small and fragile, her features so clear and pure. She was given a dress that was too big for her, and in it she looked like an angelic doll. The other children petted her because she was the littlest one. They took turns sleeping beside her at night, and she was passed from one set of arms to another. Who could resist her? Not many of the foreigners. Her smile was perfect, not cocky or aggressive, but hesitant, shy, taking nothing for granted. It was a smile with no ill will in it. It contained no resentment, no envy, only the promise of heartfelt gratitude. Adorable, the foreign ladies would murmur, and the men with them would buy a rose and hand it to the lady, and that way the men would become adorable too. And Oryx would slip the coins into the bag down the front of her dress and feel safe for one more day, because she had sold her quota. Not so her brother. He had no luck. He didn't want to sell flowers like a girl, and he hated smiling, and when he did smile, the effect was not good because of his blackened tooth. So Oryx would take some of his leftover roses and try to sell them for him. Uncle N didn't mind at first, money was money, but then he said Oryx shouldn't be seen too much in the same locations because it wouldn't do for people to become tired of her. Something else would have to be found for her brother, some other occupation. He would have to be sold elsewhere. The older children in the room shook their heads. The brother would be sold to a pimp, they said. A pimp for hairy white foreign men, or bearded brown men, or fat yellow men, any kind of men who liked little boys. They described in detail what these men would do. They laughed about it. He would be a melon bum boy, they said. That's what boys like him were called. Firm and round on the outside, soft and sweet on the inside. A nice melon bum for anyone who paid. Either that or he'd be put to work as a messenger, sent from street to street doing errands for gamblers, and that was hard work and very dangerous because the rival gamblers would kill you. Or he could be a messenger and a melon boy, both. That was the most likely thing. Oryx saw her brother's face darken and grow hard, and she wasn't surprised when he ran away. And whether he was ever caught and punished, Oryx never knew. Nor did she ask, because asking, she had found out, would do no good. One day, a man did take Oryx by the hand and say she should come into a hotel with him. She gave him her shy smile and looked up sideways and said nothing and pulled her hand away and told Uncle N afterwards. And then Uncle N said a surprising thing. If the man asked again, he said, she was to go into the hotel with him. He would want to take her up to his room, and she must go with him. She should do whatever the man asked, but she shouldn't worry, because Uncle N would be watching and would come to get her. Nothing bad would happen to her. "Will I be a melon?" she asked, "a melon bum girl?" And Uncle N laughed and said, "Where did she pick up that word?" But no, he said, that's not what would happen. Next day, the man appeared and asked Oryx if she would like some money, a lot more money than she would make by selling roses. He was a long, white, hairy man with a thick accent, but she could make out the words, and this time Oryx went with him. He held her hand, and they went up in an elevator. This was the frightening part, a tiny room with doors that shut, and when the doors opened, you were in a different place, and Uncle N hadn't explained about that. She could feel her heart thumping. "Don't be afraid," said the man, thinking she was afraid of him, but it was the other way around. He was afraid of her because his hand had a tremor. He unlocked the door with a key and they went in, and he locked the door behind him, and they were in a mauve and gold-colored room with a giant bed in it, a bed for giants, and the man asked Oryx to take off her dress. Oryx was obedient and did as she was told. She had a general idea of what else the man might want. The other children already knew about such things and discussed them freely and laughed about them. People paid a lot of money for the kinds of things this man wanted, and there were special places in the city for men like him to go, but some wouldn't go there because it was too public and they were ashamed, and they foolishly wanted to arrange things for themselves, and this man was one of that kind. So Oryx knew the man would now take off his own clothes, or some of them, and he did. And he seemed pleased when she stared at his penis, which was long and hairy like himself, with a bend in it like a little elbow. And then he kneeled down so that he was on her level with his face right next to hers. What did his face look like? Oryx couldn't remember. She could remember the singularity of his penis, but not the singularity of his face. It was like no face, she said. It was all soft like a dumpling. There was a big nose on it, a carrot nose, a long white penis nose. She laughed, holding her two hands over her mouth. "Not like your nose, Jimmy," she added in case he felt self-conscious. "Your nose is beautiful. It's a sweet nose, believe me." "I won't hurt you," said the man. His accent was so ridiculous that Oryx wanted to giggle, but she knew that would be wrong. She smiled her shy smile, and the man took hold of one of her hands and placed it on himself. He did this gently enough, but at the same time he seemed angry and in a hurry. And that's when Uncle N plunged suddenly into the room. How? He must have had a key. He must have been given a key by someone at the hotel. He picked up Oryx and hugged her and called her his little treasure and yelled at the man, who seemed very frightened and tried to scramble into his clothes. He got caught in his trousers and hopped around on one foot while trying to explain something with his bad accent, and Oryx felt bad for him. And then the man gave money to Uncle N, a lot of money, all the money in his wallet, and Uncle N went out of the room carrying Oryx like a precious vase and still muttering and scowling. But out on the street he laughed and made jokes about the man hopping around in his snarled up trousers and told Oryx she was a good girl and wouldn't she like to play this game again. So that became her game. She felt a little sorry for the men, although Uncle N said they deserved what happened to them, and they were lucky he never called the police. She somewhat regretted her part, but at the same time she enjoyed it. It made her feel strong to know that the men thought she was helpless, but she was not. It was they who were helpless, they who would soon have to stammer apologies in their silly accents and hop around on one foot in their luxurious hotel rooms, trapped in their own pant legs with their bums sticking out. Smooth bums and hairy bums, bums of different sizes and colors, while Uncle Ed berated them. From time to time they would cry. As for the money, they emptied their pockets. They threw all the money they had at Uncle N. They thanked him for taking it. They didn't want to spend any time in jail, not in that city, where the jails were not hotels, and it took a very long time for charges to be laid and for trials to be held. They wanted to get into taxis as soon as they could and climb into the big airplanes and fly away through the sky. "Little Susu," Uncle N would say, as he set Oryx down on the street outside the hotel. "You're a smart girl. I wish I could marry you. Would you like that?" This was as close to love as Oryx could get right then, so she felt happy. But what was the right answer, yes or no? She knew it was not a serious question, but a joke. She was only 5 or 6 or 7, so she couldn't get married. Anyway, the other children said that Uncle N had a grown-up wife who lived in a house elsewhere, and he had other children as well, his real children. They went to school. "Can I listen to your watch?" said Oryx with her shy smile. "Instead of," was what she meant. "Instead of marrying you, instead of answering your question, instead of being your real child." And he laughed some more, and he did let her listen to his watch, but she didn't hear any little voice inside. Pixieland Jazz. As a brief warning, this chapter also features child sex exploitation, but it is not anywhere near as graphic as Hott Totts. That's why I will read it. One day a different man came, one they'd never seen before. A tall, thin man, taller than Uncle N, with ill-fitting clothes and a pockmarked face, and said that all of them would have to come with him. Uncle N had sold his flower business, this man said. The flowers and the flower sellers and everything else. He'd gone away. He'd moved to a different city, so this tall man was the boss now. A year or so later, Oryx was told by a girl who'd been with her the first weeks in the room with the mattresses and had turned up again in her new life of movie making, that wasn't the real story. The real story was that Uncle N had been found floating in one of the city's canals with his throat cut. This girl had seen him. No, that was wrong. She hadn't seen him, but she knew somebody who had. There was no doubt about who it was. His stomach was puffed up like a pillow, his face was bloated, but it was Uncle N all right. He had no clothes on. Someone must have taken them. Or maybe somebody else, not the one who'd cut his throat, or maybe the same one, because what use did a corpse have for good clothes like his? No watch on him, either. No money, the girl had said, and she'd laughed. No pockets, so no money. There were canals in this city, Jimmy asked. He thought maybe that would give him a clue as to which city it had been. In those days, he'd wanted to know whatever was possible to know about Oryx, about anywhere she'd been. He'd wanted to track down and personally injure anyone who had ever done harm to her, made her unhappy. He'd tortured himself with painful knowledge. Every white-hot factoid he could collect, he'd shove up under his fingernails. The more it hurt, the more he was convinced he loved her. Oh yes, there were canals, Oryx said. The farmers used them and the flower growers to get to the markets. They tied up the boats and sold what they had right there, right at the quays. And that was a pretty sight from a distance, so many flowers. She looked at him. She could often tell what he was thinking. But a lot of cities have canals, she said, and rivers. The rivers are so useful for the garbage and the dead people and the babies that get thrown away, and the shit. Although she didn't like it when he swore, she sometimes liked to say what she called bad words herself because it shocked him. She had a large supply of bad words once she got going. Don't worry so much, Jimmy, she added more gently. It was a long time ago. More often than not, she acted as if she wanted to protect him from the image of herself in the past. She liked to keep only the bright side of herself turned towards him. She liked to shine. So Uncle N had ended up in a canal. He'd been unlucky. He hadn't paid off the right people, or he hadn't paid them off enough. Or maybe they'd tried to buy his business and the price was too low and he wouldn't do it. Or his own men had sold him out. There were many things that could have happened to him. Or maybe it was nothing planned, just an accident, a random killing, just a thief. Uncle N had been careless. He'd gone walking by himself, though he wasn't a careless man. I cried when I heard about it, said Oryx. Poor Uncle N. Why are you defending him, Jimmy asked. He was vermin. He was a cockroach. He liked me. He liked the money. Of course, Jimmy, said Oryx. Everyone likes that. But he could have done much worse things to me, and he didn't do them. I cried when I heard he was dead. I cried and cried. What worse things? What much worse? Jimmy, you worry too much. The children were herded out of the room with the gray mattresses, and Oryx never saw it again. She never saw most of the other children again. They were divided up, and one went this way and one that. Oryx was sold to a man who made movies. She was the only one of them that went with the movie man. He told her she was a pretty little girl and asked how old she was, but she didn't know the answer to that. He asked her wouldn't she like to be in a movie. She'd never seen a movie, so she didn't know whether she would like it or not. But it sounded like an offer of a treat, so she said yes. By this time, she was good at knowing when yes was the expected answer. The man drove her in a car with some other girls, 3 or 4, girls she didn't know. They stayed overnight at a house, a big house. It was a house for rich people. It had a high wall all around it, with broken glass and barbed wire on the top, and they went through a gate. Inside it had a rich smell. What do you mean, a rich smell? Jimmy asked, but Oryx couldn't say. Rich was just a thing you learned to tell. The house smelled like the better hotels she'd been in, many different foods cooking, wooden furniture, polishes, and soap. All those smells mixed in. There must have been flowers, flowering trees, or bushes nearby, because that was some of the smell. There were carpets on the floor, but the children didn't walk on them. The carpets were in a big room, and they just went past the open door and looked in and saw them. They were blue and pink and red. Such beauty. The room they were put in was next to the kitchen. Perhaps it was a storeroom, or it had been one. There was a smell of rice and of the bags it was packed in, though no rice was in the room then. They were fed, better food than usual, said Oryx. There was chicken in it, and told not to make any noise, and then they were locked in. There were dogs at that house, and you could hear them outside in the yard barking. The next day, some of them went in a truck in the back of the truck. There were two other children, both girls, both of them small like Oryx. One of them had just come from a village and missed her people there and cried a lot, silently hiding her face. They were lifted up into the back of the truck and locked in, and it was dark and hot, and they got thirsty. And when they had to pee, they had to do it in the truck because there was no stopping. There was a little window, though, up high, so some air got in. It was only a couple of hours, but it seemed like more because of the heat and the darkness. When they got to where they were going, and they were handed off to another man, a different one, and the truck drove off. Was there any writing on it, the truck? Asked Jimmy, sleuthing. Yes, it was red writing. What did it say? How would I know? Said Oryx reproachfully. Jimmy felt foolish. Was there a picture then? Yes, there was a picture, said Oryx after a moment. A picture of what? Oryx thought. It was a parrot, a red parrot. Flying or standing? Jimmy, you are too strange. Jimmy held on to it, this red parrot. He kept it in mind, and sometimes it would appear to him in reveries charged with mystery and hidden significance, a symbol free of all context. It must have been a brand name, a logo. He searched the internet for parrot, parrot brand, parrot ink, red parrot. He found Alex the corknut parrot, who'd said, I'm going away now, but that was no help to him because Alex was the wrong color. He wanted the red parrot to be a link between the story Oryx had told him and the so-called real world. He wanted to be walking along a street or trolling through the web, and eureka, there it would be, the red parrot, the code, the password, and then many things would become clear. The building where the movies was made was in a different city, or it might have been in a different part of the same city, because the city was very big, said Oryx. The room she stayed in with the other girls was in that building, too. They almost never went outside, except up on the flat roof sometimes when the movie was to be made up there. Some of the men who came to the building wanted to be outside while the movie was being filmed. They wanted to be seen, and at the same time they wanted to be hidden. The roof had a wall around it. Maybe they wanted God to see them, said Oryx. What do you think, Jimmy? They were showing off to God? I think so. These men all had ideas about what should be in their movie. They wanted things in the background, chairs or tree, and they wanted ropes or screaming or shoes. Sometimes they would say, just do it, I'm paying for it, or things like that. Because everything in these movies had a price. Every hair bow, every flower, every object, every gesture. If the men thought up something new, there'd have to be a discussion about how much that new thing ought to cost. So I learned about life, said Oryx. Learned what? Said Jimmy. He shouldn't have had the pizza and the weed they'd smoked on top of that. He was feeling a little sick. That everything has a price. Not everything. That can't be true. You can't buy time. You can't buy... He wanted to say love, but hesitated. It was too soppy. You can't buy it, but it has a price, said Oryx. Everything has a price. Not me, said Jimmy, trying to joke. I don't have a price. Wrong as usual. Being in a movie, said Oryx, was doing what you were told. If they wanted you to smile, then you had to smile. If they wanted you to cry, you had to do that too. Whatever it was, you had to do it, and you did it because you were afraid not to. You did what they told you to do to the men who came, and then sometimes those men did things to you. That was movies. What sort of things, said Jimmy. You know, said Oryx. You saw. You have the picture of it. I only saw that one, said Jimmy, only the one with you in it. I bet you saw more with me. You don't remember. I could look different. I could wear different clothes and wigs. I could be someone else, do other things. Like what else? What else did they make you do? They were all the same, those movies, said Oryx. She washed her hands. She was painting her nails now. Her delicate oval nails, so perfectly shaped, peach-colored, to match the flowered wrapper she was wearing. Not a smudge on her. Later, she would do her toes. It was less boring for the children to make the movies than to do what they did the rest of the time, which was nothing much. They watched cartoons on the old DVD in one of the rooms, mice and birds being chased around by their other animals that could never catch them. Or they brushed and braided one another's hair, or they ate and slept. Sometimes other people came to use the space to make different kinds of movies. Grown-up women came, women with breasts, and grown-up men, actors. The children could watch them making those movies if they didn't get in the way, though sometimes the actors objected because the little girls would giggle at their penises, so big, and then sometimes all of a sudden so small, and then the children had to go back into their room. They washed a lot. That was important. They took showers with a bucket. They were supposed to be pure-looking. On a bad day, when there was no business, they'd get tired and restless, and then they would argue and fight. Sometimes they'd be given a toke or a drink to calm them down, beer maybe, but no hard drugs. Those would shrivel them up, and they weren't allowed to smoke. The man in charge, the big man, not the man with the camera, said they shouldn't smoke because it would make their teeth brown. They did smoke sometimes anyways, because the man with the camera might give them a cigarette to share. The man with the camera was white, and his name was Jack. He was the one they mostly saw. He had hair like a frayed rope, and he smelled too strong because he was a meat eater. He ate so much meat. He didn't like fish. He didn't like rice either, but he liked noodles. Noodles with lots of meat. Jack said that where he came from, the movies were bigger and better, the best in the world. He kept saying he wanted to go home. He said it was only pure dumb chance he wasn't dead, that this fucking country hadn't killed him with its lousy food. He said he'd almost died from some disease he'd got from the water, and the only thing that had saved him was getting really, really pissed because alcohol killed germs. Then he had to explain to them about germs. The little girls laughed about the germs because they didn't believe in them, but they believed about the disease because they'd seen it happen. Spirits caused it, everyone knew that. Spirits and bad luck. Jack had not said the right prayers. Jack said he would get sick more often from the rotten food and water, only he had a really strong stomach. He said you needed a strong stomach in this business. He said the video cam was antique roadshow junk and the lights were poor, so no wonder everything looked like cheap shit. He said he wished he had $1 million, but he pissed all of his money away. He said he couldn't hold on to money. It slid off of him like water off a greased whore. Don't be like me when you grow up, he would say. And the girls would laugh because whatever else happened to them, they would never be like him. A rope-haired clownish giant with a cock like a wrinkly old carrot. Oryx said she had many chances to see that old carrot up close because Jack wanted to do movie things with her when there were no movies. And then he'd be sad and tell her he was sorry. That was puzzling. You did it for nothing, said Jimmy. I thought you said everything had a price. He didn't feel he'd won the argument about money. He wanted another turn. Oryx paused, lifting the nail polish brush. She looked at her hand. I traded him, she said. Traded him for what, said Jimmy. What did that pathetic prick of a loser have to offer? Why do you think he is bad, said Oryx. He never did anything with me that you don't do. Not nearly so many things. I don't do them against your will, said Jimmy. Anyway, you're grown up now. Oryx laughed. What is my will, she said. And then she must have seen his pained look, so she stopped laughing. He taught me to read, she said quietly, to speak English and to read English words. Talking first and then reading, not so good at first, and I still don't talk so good, but you always have to start somewhere. Don't you think so, Jimmy? You talk perfectly, said Jimmy. You don't need to tell lies to me. So that is how. It took a long time, but he was very patient. He had one book. I don't know where he got it, but it was a book for children. It had a girl in it with long braids and stockings. That was a hard word, stockings, who jumped around and did whatever she liked. So this is what we read, and it was a good trade because, Jimmy, if I hadn't done it, I couldn't be talking to you, no? Done what? Said Jimmy. He couldn't stand it. If he had this Jack, this piece of garbage in the room right now, he'd wring his neck like a wormy old sock. What did you do for him? You suck him off? Crake is right, said Oryx coldly. You do not have an elegant mind. Elegant mind was just math talk, that patronizing jargon the math nerds used, but it hurt Jimmy anyway. No, what hurt was the thought of Oryx and Crake discussing him that way, behind his back. I'm sorry, he said. He ought to know better than to speak so bluntly to her. Now maybe I wouldn't do it, but I was a child then, said Oryx more softly. Why are you so angry? I don't buy it, said Jimmy. Where was her rage? How far down was it buried? What did he have to do to dig it up? You don't buy what? Your whole fucking story, all this sweetness and acceptance and crap. If you don't want to buy that, Jimmy, said Oryx, looking at him tenderly, what is it that you would like to buy instead? Jack had a name for the building where the movies went on. He called it Pixieland. None of the children knew what that meant, Pixieland, because it was an English word and an English idea, and Jack couldn't explain it. All right, pixies, rise and shine, he'd say. Candy time. He brought candies for them as a treat sometimes. Want a candy, candy, he'd say. That also was a joke, but they didn't know what it meant either. He'd let them see the movies of themselves if he felt like it, or if he'd just been doing drugs. They could tell when he'd been shooting or snorting because he was happier then. He liked to play pop music while they were working, something with a bounce. Upbeat, he called it. Elvis Presley, things like that. He said he liked the golden oldies from back when songs had words. Called me sentimental, he said, causing puzzlement. He liked Frank Sinatra, too, and Doris Day. Oryx knew all the words to love me or leave me before she had any idea what they meant. Sing us some Pixieland Jazz, Jack would say, and so that's what Oryx would sing. He was always pleased. What was this guy's name, said Jimmy. What a jerk, this Jack. Jack the jerk off. Name-calling helped, thought Jimmy. He'd like to twist the guy's head off. His name was Jack, I told you. He told us a poem about it in English. Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. Jack has a big old candlestick. I mean his other name. He didn't have another name. Working was what Jack called what they did. Working girls, he called them. He used to say whistle while you work. He used to say work harder. He used to say put some jazz into it. He used to say act like you mean it or you want to get hurt. He used to say come on, sex midgets, you can do better. He used to say you're only young once. That's all, said Oryx. What do you mean that's all? That's all there was, she said. That's all there was to it. What about, did they ever what? They didn't, not when you were that young. They couldn't have. Please, Jimmy, tell me what you're asking. Oh, very cool. He wanted to shake her. Did they rape you? He could barely squeeze it out. What answer was he expecting? What did he want? Why do you want to talk about ugly things, she said. Her voice was silvery like a music box. She waved one hand in the air to dry the nails. We should think only beautiful things as much as we can. There is so much beautiful in the world if you look around. You're only looking at the dirt under your feet, Jimmy. It's not good for you. She would never tell him. Why did this drive him so crazy? It wasn't real sex, was it, he asked. In the movies, it was only acting, wasn't it? But Jimmy, you should know. All sex is real.